yeah, I'm just going to kind of give you 3 buckets that I was able to kind of figure out as I was trying to collect as much information as possible, both from our staff and what we're hearing individually. One of the big pressing issues with nonprofits right now is just keeping up with existing work, especially for direct service organizations. There's certainly work that they were already doing at capacity, but now they're addressing that with increased demand while dealing with shortage of volunteers, also trying to figure out how to support staff who are either trying to work remotely or protecting the staff and volunteers who are unable to work remotely because their services are required to be there. Just as a sort of a context, in 2017, Propel Nonprofits and MCN did a CFLO survey, and we just wanted to give you some thoughts around what organizations are dealing with. In that survey, 68% of organizations predicted ending the year 2018 with a deficit or a break even in terms of their budget, and 60% indicated having less than 3 months of cash on hand. So that's something that they're dealing with as they're trying to address immediate needs, and then also trying to strategize in terms of how to best keep their doors open, which also leads into reprioritizing essential work. And that's a really difficult position that a lot of nonprofits are facing. What is essential work when everything seems so essential? For example, we have spoke with an organization that deals with inpatient and outpatient services that are affected deeply by social distancing. There are family members who are eager to connect with their families in these hospitals and facilities, but unable to have the resources like video technology to even communicate to their loved ones. School closures or schools that are dealing with fundraising. They were expecting to do this big fundraiser. One school that I know about purchased like $100,000 worth of things that they were going to sell at their fundraiser, but now they can't do it because they have to cancel it. So they're trying to deal with the impact of what does that mean when we have spent that much money and no way to sell them. And then also choosing really hard decisions between what services to provide or protecting your staff and volunteers. Do you provide transportation for medical services or continue delivery of meals? Those are super important things that individuals are relying on and nonprofits want to provide, but they are also just dealing with what's the most essential needs that they have right now. And then also as well, because nonprofits, many of us are not necessarily set up for remote work, having to deal with both school closures and supporting the staff, lack of technology, lack of access to laptops, webcams, paid services like Zoom, for example, how to effectively make sure that folks who are able to work from home are able to do so effectively while dealing with childcare as well as full-time work. So there's a need for flexibility. And then there's a staff who need overtime, increase in sick leave, or if a staff is infected or are supporting family members who are, and how do you best support that staff? Then I think we're also seeing a lot of nonprofits, especially this week, prioritizing meeting immediate needs versus really being able to strategize about long-term sustainability. And so it's just really about super quick responses to all of the different things that I talked about as well, but also dealing with like, well, we get a lot of donations in cash, and do you go into the office when we're being required to social distance, but we actually need that money now in order for us to just even make this month's rent or payroll. I just heard about, I don't mean to necessarily bring down a company, but Brown Paper Tickets is a service that provides event revenue collection for nonprofits. And because they just released a statement to all of their nonprofits that they were supposed to be paying out from an event that they just had, that they are not there, that they've asked these organizations to not cash their check because it will bounce. And apparently they were facing challenges in the loss of events, all these different canceled events, and they were unable to pay out what organizations were being owed. And so suddenly organizations who were like, we just had our fundraising event, we were expecting this cash, we're not able to get that money in immediately. Earned income revenue yes, we have a lot of organizations. We had our board meeting this week, and a lot of our organizations are very much impacted by earned income revenue strategies. Schools that are relying on tuitions, like preschools, for example, tickets and admission fees for museums and theaters, they're being closed. Rec centers, events beyond fundraising events are being canceled, like Loft Literary Center, for example. They were going to have this whole Lit Fest, and it was going to be really great, but obviously they had to cancel, and they're trying to deal with that loss of income now. And then also protecting the most vulnerable. A lot of organizations that focus on culturally specific communities and vulnerable populations are dealing with a rise in xenophobia and racism, especially for the Asian American communities. Supporting immigrant populations that currently do not qualify for federal state funding. And then, of course, people of color are disproportionately affected by low paying or hourly paid jobs. And so they're unable to interrupt work. But then also dealing with limited access to healthcare, childcare, and transportation. There's a lot more there, but I'm going to stop right here because it's a lot. Kari or John, do you have anything else to add?
Well, one other thing to mention is nonprofits are sort of a key channel to inform government about the effects of both sort of crises and also what the effects would be on different programs. So, you know, clearly the legislature is kind of changed its response. The building is closed. Their legislators are not meeting in person except for sort of their plenary sessions. But the nonprofit sector on sort of a whole set of issues from inputs to Department of Human Services about relaxing conditions. And I think a key theme is sort of needing increased flexibility in the relationship between nonprofits and government, and sort of reducing some of the conditions, and then making resources available and not holding those up. And there have been some good stories about state and local government becoming more flexible, and we can talk about that more in sort of the funder response to the situation. And a key question nonprofits have is, well, what are other organizations are doing? And then also, what are the funding opportunities? And I know all of you on this call have been getting questions and inquiries about this, and I'll ask Kari to talk more about doing some information gathering so MCN can share this back with nonprofits, and doing this in conjunction with MCF. Kari?
And I echo John's earlier kudos to the Council on Foundations and all your members. To raise $4.4 million in 2 days is no small feat, says the Director of Advancement for MCN. So congratulations, you all. That's great. So for 25 years, MCN's been producing a grants directory that features funding opportunities from 100 of the top grant-making foundations in Minnesota. And obviously in this unprecedented moment in time, we see a lot of folks really pivoting to respond quickly, and the funding community is one of those. So as an extension of our work, we have decided to pull together a special edition 2020 grants directory featuring disaster relief funding opportunities only. We sent out a brief survey yesterday, and I'm going to post a link to that in the chat, and are asking folks to complete it. And we're asking questions, not just kind of funding directly, but what are other ways in which your foundation is responding, either augmenting kind of current grant conditions, changing payment schedule, loans or PRIs to free up kind of cash for nonprofits in crisis. So please, if you haven't done so already, take 10 minutes at the most to fill out that survey. Our team is working very diligently to get out version 1 even yet this week, and we will be updating that as information becomes available. So there's no hard deadline with this one. It's going to be an evolving document. We all evolve to keep up with this crazy time. So thanks.
So, you know, our time is coming that we agreed with Susie and Paul about. So just one last minute, some comments that, there are 1,000 responses available from how Minnesota Philanthropy and the federal government and state and local government could respond. Some of the key themes are reducing friction, reducing some of the process considerations of information gathering and making decisions. Heard some great stories about Ramsey County, where basically texting back and forth off hours with organizations that receive contracts and coming up with sort of special adjustments and increased funding in real time. And I think we've seen a lot of this sort of increased flexibility across philanthropy. And also opportunities to relax or eliminate conditions on funding. So a number of funders sort of converting special project funding to general operating funding, sort of giving the organization the opportunity to make strategic decisions in this current time. Clearly the MCF and the ability of foundations to work collaboratively Minnesota has a clear advantage in this area, and I think that's a strength. And then lastly, just paying attention to the needs of organizations. So I know a number of funders have reached out to the nonprofits they work with, and I know that'll continue, but sort of checking in with organizations to find out what is occurring, what are your current needs, what does it look like going forward. We have a huge community investment in these organizations, and this is sort of part of what makes Minnesota stand out, and it would be what we don't want to have as organizations facing yet one more crisis through no fault of their own that could have been avoided, and that's where some of these sort of cash attention will be critical in the next week. And seeing the headline today about 18 months, it's really a big part of this is going to fall on federal and state government and paying attention to what are they doing and how can philanthropy and nonprofits sort of be the best service providers and best philanthropic resources possible, given what else is happening. And a lot of that will come down to conversations like this, exchanging ideas and trying to get some shared community knowledge. So, Susie, I hope that's helpful, and glad to be a part of the next discussion.
Great. Thank you, MCN team, John, Nanoko, and Kari. We appreciate your insights and the good service and attention you're giving to our nonprofit partners, your members. I want to just say, before we're going to switch to Q&A now and discussion, so think about questions that you want to ask of the MCN team, or comments that you want to make about things that you're doing, or that you maybe want to share with your peers or ask your peers about their thoughts. I want to just say that there are really two important things for me that came out of this presentation by MCN. One is there's a very simple action that you can all take, which is to respond to the survey that Kari mentioned, which will pull together information about what each foundation is doing. And they will post that in their updated grants directory. And that will be a really helpful, important resource for the nonprofit community. So if everyone could just take 10 minutes today to do that, that would be great. The second thing is, as we've heard talk about flexibility, reducing conditions, reducing friction, process changes, things like that, as I think about the funding sources in the nonprofit sector, if we think about our resources, philanthropy, private philanthropy, government, fees for service, earned income through programs or other things. The resources from philanthropy right now are the most flexible, most available resources. It is much more difficult to get government to change. It is much more difficult to find new sources of earned revenue or to have new fee-for-service revenue in this time. I hope that we can all understand the importance of us thinking about the resources that we in philanthropy inject into the nonprofit community as the most flexible, most innovative, most quick to be able to change, and really think in your own organizations about what you're able to do in this time. How about if we turn quickly to Paul to give us a reminder about how we're going to do the chat and what we're going to do if it goes off the rails.
Yes. So everyone has the capacity to unmute your individual lines. We would love to hear your voices with your questions, with your comments. And so we can just open it up, and perhaps it will be a slow and steady pace of individual comments and questions. If it does seem that we're getting a bottleneck and lots of people jumping in at the same time, we can use the chat function, and you can just let me know that you'd like to be in the queue to speak, and then I will announce you when it's that time. So a couple of comments. The chat bar is open, and you can just send a note that way if you don't have the capacity to use a microphone. Another comment in the chat, you'll see that there is a link to the MCN survey. So if you didn't receive the email, there is already a link to the survey in the chat, and so you could check that out as well. And as a note, there was an individual question about whether Nanoko's comments, whether the list of challenges that Nanoko had mentioned, if those would become available, and MCN has mentioned that they can make those available. So we'll stay tuned to that. Maybe we'll just throw that question back to either Nanoko or Kari. How would folks be able to find a list of those challenges that Nanoko stated?
Sure. So that's a really good question. I have a document of this.
Nanoko, there's some trouble with your microphone. We weren't able to hear what you said, but I would like to tell everyone on the call that we are recording this webinar so we can have it available for people to listen to later, and one of us can listen to it again and make a list of all the great things that Nanoko said. Perfect.
And so why don't we start out, we have a couple of people who have raised their hands, and why don't we turn it directly over to Matt Verilek, who has a comment.
Thanks, and I meant to send my raising hand just to the organizers, but you all got to see it because I'm learning the chat function. Thanks to everyone who is showing great leadership on this topic, the fundraising, and even just this opportunity to communicate. I wanted to make a plug for all of us to pay attention to what SBA is doing. I was at SBA before coming into the philanthropic sector, so it's sort of near and dear to my heart. Normally, SBA is for for-profit businesses, but in disaster situations, as some of you probably know, the economic injury disaster loans that they make available if our governor's disaster declaration gets approved, and it was just submitted and probably will be approved soon, those actually can be made available to nonprofits as well as for-profits. Now, granted, a grant is always preferable to a loan, but in some instances that might be relevant. And also in this case, it is not banks who make those loans, but rather the SBA itself acts as the banker, and you apply for these loans through an online portal. And so you'll see SBA is doing a great job of communicating lots of information and putting that portal out there. It's not active yet because the declaration hasn't been made, but we're talking about, I think, 2.75% money with terms up to 30 years. And so in some cases that could be relevant to nonprofits that we're trying to serve also through our grant.
That's great, thank you, Matt. And so SBA, the Small Business Administration, is that correct?
That's correct, federal agency.
Perfect, thanks, Matt. All right, I see that Eric Torch is raising his hand for a question.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Eric Torch with the Northland Foundation. So really appreciate MCN kind of stepping up and looking at updating the grants directory for 2020. You know, and wanting to be not overly burdensome for the nonprofits that are working hard to scramble and respond to community needs. You know, I'm wondering if anybody knows if anyone is doing any surveys of nonprofits and to find out, how they're responding. I'm thinking there's probably maybe a more efficient and effective way for each of us as individual funders that want to stay in the know than asking them individually. And so just kind of wondering if John or Kari or Nanoko, if MCN has thought about doing kind of a similar survey for how nonprofits are responding and what they're doing, so as a way for us to be kind of efficient in collecting that knowledge, or if anyone else is doing that. So thank you.
Well, maybe I'll go first. This is John. Actually, we have thought about it, and we've looked at some sort of survey models, and at least for now decided not to do it, in the sense that we know in large part what some of the answers would be, and that the real question is, what are the specific effects on specific organizations? We know earned income for arts organizations has dropped close to zero, that the organizations that are on reimbursement schedules for providing services government funded, so it could be county or state, are in a situation of needing to potentially renegotiate. It really depends on the organization. An example is Clues, where they've closed down their facilities, but their mental health services are continuing on an online basis. So figuring out what you can reimburse for. So for the time being, I think we put the idea of surveying nonprofits on hold, but are trying to gather sort of similar scale and scope information, as well as, what's the sort of the variation of impact on different activity areas of nonprofits. But Kari or Nanoko, do you want to comment?
So my internet is spotty, it sounds like. Is that what happened before? So I apologize. One of the things I wanted to say was that rather than doing a survey and kind of overburdening the nonprofit sector right now, what we're trying to do is keep track of themes. And the way we're doing that is by providing resources on our website. So we have a page that's dedicated to the COVID-19, and it's in buckets right now, but we are continuously updating it. So anything from we're hearing remote work challenges, fundraising challenges, just in terms of what kind of information do you provide to your staff. So we're trying to keep them in buckets, and that might at least be able to give you some directions in terms of just the overall themes that we're hearing from the sector.
Yeah, and I think the question was not so much about sort of the adverse challenges and impacts of the current situation, but it's more about sort of staying, in the know about, how organizations are responding to what the needs are, knowing, what groups are doing, what for food security or, or mental health or things like that, as a way to kind of be a little bit more efficient in terms of, what work is happening, as a way, to help us, understand the best response that we can have.
I will take that feedback back to our team and then see what we can do in terms of being able to provide that for you all. Yes, I will do that. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna just jump down. It looks like maybe Nate Dorr has a response as well to Eric's question about one example of what's happening up in Northwest Minnesota. And then we'll go to Heather, who has a separate question. So Nate, would you like to go?
Sure. Karen White, our president and CEO at Northwest Minnesota Foundation, on Monday asked me to create a community needs survey. And so did a Survey Monkey quick, and I think we got that launched about 3 o'clock on Tuesday. And just through social media, we've had about 145 responses as of just a few minutes ago. And we still plan to do an email e-blast to get to, I think there's 4,000 people on that contacts. So we're trying to get a regional assessment just in case the state or the feds are asking what the needs are in our community. We got pretty good representation from our region, and we maybe have oversampled, but we have about 40–45% were business owners. Clothing doesn't seem clothing and transportation doesn't seem to be like a real big issue right now, but cash flow for businesses and nonprofits, household income are really, they're either disrupted daily and are seeing shortages or are planning for reduced access to things. So, and I did look at critical care, healthcare, and also preventative care. So just from the small sample I saw, more preventative care is being, they're putting it off is kind of the summary of it, but it's just really interesting to get feedback. And I haven't read through all the comment boxes, but those, we did ask for local solutions and things. And so part of getting quality information out is something people are interested in. So we've also created a landing page in response. So, and trying to provide resources. That's kind of what we're doing. We'll keep monitoring it, and we don't want to, we're not sure about making the data public at this point because it does take some analysis and cleaning of the data. But if some people are really interested in our results, I can share a password protected link. Just I guess email me or reach out. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And so that was Nate Dorr with Northwest Minnesota Foundation. So let's see, Heather, you have a question.
Hey, Paul. Yeah, thanks. This is Heather with the St. Croix Valley Foundation. I'm especially curious since we have our colleagues at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits online. So we haven't yet launched a local fund for the Valley, but we're talking about it. And one of our concerns as we're talking about it, and we're meeting with our United Way colleagues, but really wanting to make sure that we do this in a way that isn't taking dollars away from what our nonprofit partners are trying to do right now, which is raise money directly to help them meet local needs. So I guess any advice from MCN and or any of you on the phone, especially in more, outside the metro area, if you've already figured this out and you've got some great language on your website. I mean, we've been out looking to see what other folks are doing, but I mean, obviously we have the ability to leverage maybe some matches from some of the other funders in our region. I mean, so we've got our affiliate boards. So we have some unique infrastructure and abilities, and I just want to be really careful that we're not competing either with our United Way, who already does basic needs so well in our region, and or with our nonprofits, not have them feel like we're taking dollars that could have gone directly to them from the community and instead pulling them into a fund, making it harder, to your point, for them to get those dollars quickly. So would love to hear any thoughts on that.
Well, this is John again, and maybe I'll ask Kari to pitch in on the sort of fundraisers perspective. I think it's a judgment call of what's the best way to get resources to where they're needed, but also using the connections and the networks. I think this could be a big opportunity for community foundations to reach out to their donor advised funds, and that's a huge, sometimes tapped resource, but it's I think that would be one deserving special attention. Kari?
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of unique value propositions that community foundations bring, which I'm sure you know, is a knowledge of the local community. And so I just would encourage you to keep connected to the nonprofit organizations that are within your service area and just have an awareness of what they're doing, what they're needing, and what their own fundraising efforts are. And in that way, I think you can just holding that knowledge and awareness as you're developing your kind of fundraising appeals and plans can help avoid some of that competition or duplication of fundraising efforts.
Let me add that.
Go ahead, John.
Not that there's a competition with commercial donor advised fund sponsors, but this could be a time when community foundations absolutely establish their comparative advantage of that local community knowledge and connection. Is that the Fidelity, Vanguard, Goldman Sachs aren't as close to the community, and I don't know how organizations can even approach them, but our community foundations are here and have staff and are reachable. So thank you for that.
This isn't attacking necessarily, but I just wanted to point out the fact that I think keeping, as much as you can, keeping your nonprofits informed about sort of how you're thinking about creating those funds, because everyone is thinking about it in a different way. But just if as much as possible, transparency I think is critical if you're continuing to provide basic general operating support, regardless of whether this extra fund is going to come in or not. I think the nonprofits really need to have some sense of security from the funders that they are currently working with, and they would really appreciate that kind of direct communication. So.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Anil, it looks like you have a comment with some resources and then maybe a question for MCF. Would you like to tell us about the resources first?
Sure. So we're part of a national group of funders called the Youth Transition Funders Group, which includes, I think Robert Wood Johnson is on there, Annie E. Casey, Sherwood out of Omaha. And so, you know, they put together this list of resources specifically for folks who are thinking about how to support young people who are particularly vulnerable during this time. So I would encourage you all to check that out. Yesterday, they had scheduled a time for folks to hear from an epidemiologist, which just, you know, both personally and professionally was helpful. So it's a great resource. And then the question that I had is, you know, is a longer term question, which is, you know, the census is still happening right now. How are we thinking about ensuring fidelity to that? Because that has long-term implications for this crisis and potentially future crises. So can you just talk a little bit about how that work is might be impacted?
Yeah, so that could be a question for MCN or for MCF. Susie, do you want to take a stab at that?
I think Katina has logged on and is trying to answer. Katina?
Perfect. Katina, if you're speaking, you might be muted right now. So we're not hearing from Katina.
Maybe Katina can put her comment into the chat box and you could read her response, Paul.
Beautiful.
Katina, okay? I'll text her that.
And I'm not sure if anyone from MCN is able to answer.
You know, the people have received their sort of notice to complete the census online. Minnesota is right now is the #1 response state. Wisconsin is #2. So it's out there. Nonprofits have been doing outreach in conjunction with MCF and sort of the larger consortium. So I think that work is going on, but more remotely. And they'd had some in-person events planned, but of course those are on hold.
Great. And we'll watch. I will definitely report if we get a response as well from Katina. In the meantime, let's go to Robert. Robert, looks like maybe you had a comment to share.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay. So we're already hearing from some of our grantees that there's going to be a massive loss of earned revenue and contributions as a result of the recession that's coming. And so one strategy we're looking at this summer is doing some targeted Gen Op grants to some of our grantees, at least, to help them shore up themselves during this kind of very difficult period after the emergency phase.
Great, thank you. And Don Ganji, maybe a comment as well?
Hi, yes. Hi, all. Echoing Robert's comments about the fact that nonprofits are going to be doing a great job of raising funds in this immediate time frame for themselves. So we don't want to necessarily compete with that, but we do also need to look down the road at what their needs are going to be in a few weeks or months with regards to their long-term recovery from this work as well. And that's a wonderful role that we can help fill.
Great. For both those comments, MCN, any thoughts that raises on your side?
Just say here, here. Thank you for being there.
Great. And so I don't see any additional questions right now or comments. Definitely feel free to either chat to raise your hand, or if anybody would like to speak up right now, feel free to do so. I will say, it says Katina has responded by chat, and she says, in terms of the census, we are encouraging census advocates to shift to digital digital strategies, so online, phone, text, and social media. And so I guess, you know, stay tuned for how you might be able to be engaged in that way, and stay tuned for how you might be contacted in that way as well. So again, anyone that would like to speak up now, we have a few more minutes, and we can definitely fill that time. And Susie, otherwise we might turn it back to you.
Paul, could I mention one other issue? And this is a public policy issue that MCF members may be hearing about as well from organizations you work with, which is there's a, you know, kind of a wrinkle in the unemployment compensation system that nonprofits are allowed to opt out of the state UC system. And it has made sense for years because nonprofits tend to have fewer unemployment claims, so they could save a great deal of money if they opted out of the state and just became a direct reimburser. So if their employees did file claims, they would reimburse the state for the cost of that claim. So nonprofit employees are covered in the same as other employees in the UC system. So when they file a claim, they get unemployment compensation in the same way as all other employees. The difference is, in this situation, the state and federal government has talked about this as well, are creating some ways to reduce the impact on employers for the cost of unemployment compensation. Unfortunately, the way they're doing it would only affect organizations that are in the state system. So it would benefit all for-profit employers, and it could benefit some nonprofit employers, but many substantial Minnesota nonprofits, including most of the arts and health organizations, even all the tribal governments are affected by this as well. Basically, we need a change in state, either executive decisions or state law. And so the Marie Ellis, MCN's public policy director, and I know she's keeping Katina informed as well. But this could be millions of dollars affecting nonprofits at exactly the worst time. So there is a delay of when these reimbursements are sought from the employers, so of 8 to 10 weeks. But this is a current issue in play, and you may be hearing more about it.
That's great. Thank you, John. In the meantime, we also had another question come up. And so let's see. So the question, and this may be open both to MCN, MCF, and others, is how are folks thinking about this longitudinally? Are folks thinking 5 weeks, 8 weeks, 4 months? And then how are we thinking about donations now versus in the future? So perhaps a complicated question. Anybody that would like to jump in to answer that?
I'll jump in and really look forward to hearing what other people have to say. A couple of things that I've seen just in the last, I don't know, minutes or whatever about timeline. One, I saw that one state, maybe more now, has extended their school closures through the end of April. So that feels like it's an indicator of things to come. Also, I guess Keith Ellison, our Attorney General, said this morning that social distancing may need to be in place until July. We are well informed at MCF by our Minnesota Disaster Recovery Fund. That's the fund. The Disaster Philanthropy Working Group. We've worked with that group of funders for many years, and they're very knowledgeable and experienced in situations like this. And they've been very clear that the short and long-term needs both need to be considered throughout, and that there will be many demands for short-term relief, and the way to be successful is to understand that there will be significant longer term needs and to plan accordingly, even when as funders that may mean critique from the community or prospective recipients in the short term, but that staying the course for the long term is essential. So for the Minnesota Disaster Recovery Fund that we've set it up with that understanding and expect that some of the resources distributed will be rapid response and other resources will be held for a longer term commitment that could be, you know, in the few months or longer kind of range.
Thank you, Susie. If there's anyone else that wants to jump in on that question.
Maybe, Paul, could I just mention, so one other issue that'll be on the table will be private foundation payouts in light of the decrease in foundation assets. So, and in the past, there have been a number of Minnesota foundations that have increased payout in the time of recession, and that'll be another sort of community conversation of how do we respond over the next 1 to 3 years, really, as we deal both with the sort of the health crisis as well as the recession.
That's great. Thank you, John. One quick comment that I'll note, I see that there's a question about volunteer activities at MCF's Corporate Executive Roundtable, which is next Wednesday, and you can check our website calendar for sign-up information. The Corporate Executive Roundtable has shifted focus, so any of you who are corporate executives, corporate philanthropy executives, could join that. We're going to be focusing on talking about how corporate foundations and corporate giving is responding to this crisis and really thinking about that in that particular context. Let's see, another question then. Donna, would you like to ask your question? And I think we can. If you want to start speaking, it sounds like maybe it's a little hard to hear, but go ahead.
I was just wondering if anyone has heard of linking resources, meaning I would assume some nonprofits are in need of specific things that other nonprofits may actually have and could lease out as a revenue stream. For example, we are having charter schools ask for emergency funding to buy laptops. And I am wondering if there are certain training programs or different nonprofits that, because of social distancing, are not using laptops that could actually lease the laptops out for earned revenue. Any linking sites going on among nonprofits to try to resource each other.
Great. And so just to recap, linking resources where one nonprofit can lease or share with another nonprofit. John, Kari, Nanoko, have you heard of anything like that, or do you know of anything like that?
So it's not quite answering that particular question, but hands-on Twin Cities, for example, are creating a site to link volunteers to immediate needs of nonprofits. But I personally have not heard of other types of resources that might help. Kari, have you heard anything?
Not yet, but I pasted a link in the chat to MCN's resource page. We've been curating and updating in real time as resources become available to nonprofits, and then thinking about Eric Torch's earlier comment about a potential survey, that if that is something that MCN decides to go forward with as nonprofits transition from kind of operations mindset to strategic planning mindset, that could be a question that we could ask. Kind of what things do you have and what do you need?
That's great. Thank you. I will just mention, anyone that's not following the chat, there are some great links in there we will curate any of those links that might be useful to share, and we will add them to the MCF webpage, the COVID-19 resource webpage. So you can definitely check out links there as we're going along. Feel free to click them here. I see, Frank, you have an idea for a future call, which is, I think, maybe a great tip that we could turn it back to Susie to maybe talk about our future calls coming up.
Sure, but I want to know what the tip was. If there's an idea.
So yes, tips. Frank's idea. Frank mentioned mental health needs. Frank, do you want to say more about that? And
no. Okay. Follow up with an email if you care to, Frank. Yes, so thanks. We have calls scheduled Mondays and Thursdays through the end of the month. We'll assess at that time how frequently people feel like this is useful, how much information is helpful to be shared in this way. We're putting together some ideas for the future calls. Please send them our way if you have requests or ideas. I've been multitasking while on this call, and we have just confirmed that for Monday at 1 o'clock, the topic of the call will be the various funds that are being put together. We're going to do this call not just as an MCF member call, but as an MCF and MCN member call. We will have representatives from the Minnesota Disaster Recovery Fund, which is MCF, Headwaters Foundation for Justice, which is setting up a fund, the Otto Bremer Trust, which has pledged $50 million for this effort, and the Minneapolis Foundation. The plan here will be to have an organized place where nonprofits and foundations can understand the differences between these funds and how they will be deployed into the community, and also to show alignment and collaboration between the funds. We're not competing with each other. We really want to be aligned and be strategic about how different resources are being deployed. To Heather's earlier question, I would say if any of you either are starting your own funds or are aware of other funds that are starting, please be in touch directly with me, because we could include those on this call as well. It's very clear that the nonprofit community is deeply interested in understanding as soon as possible how response funds will be distributed and whether their organizations will be eligible. So that will be the purpose of this call. We hope you all join us so you can understand the landscape of funding. And because we expect that this will be very of great interest to nonprofits, we need to move to a different platform for that call. We'll communicate with you if you have registered for it about how to get on through Zoom, and we'll update that on our website. So that's the next call. Paul, do you have any comments about calls after that? We're really kind of coming up with these one at a time, real time, but if you have any comments about the things in the queue, please go ahead.
I don't know that I do. We have the comment from Frank about Frank Forsberg about mental health needs of the nonprofit partners, which we definitely could add. We also have talked about bringing back individuals from the Disaster Recovery
Center for Disaster Philanthropy.
Thank you. So we definitely will have more information as the week progresses.
Thanks everyone for joining. We feel very grateful to be in this partnership with our good friends and colleagues at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. We appreciate you taking the time today to talk to the philanthropic community. We know you're super busy with your own members. It was a gift for you to spend this time with us today. Thank you all MCF members for choosing to be connected to each other during this time through these calls. Please let us know if there's anything we can do for you. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.